I think it's really important to see all these TV anchors, personalities showing themselves getting the shot. We've seen a lot of vaccine selfies from lots of folks at lots of different networks.
This week on Disaffected, virtue signaling is everywhere. It's not enough to do good for good's sake. We have to photograph it, bedazzle it, and post it online so everyone can look at the good we do. And what good are we doing? We're muzzling our neighbors through mask enforcement, sterilizing children to prove we love them, and congratulating ourselves with baby talk. We'll look at how infantilized poses disguise evil so that it can walk around in broad daylight with a smile. All this and more this week on Disaffected. Welcome to Disaffected. I'm Joshua Slocum. This is the show where we talk about culture and politics through a psychological lens. The thesis of this show is that what we are seeing, particularly in social justice activism and what I call the woke left, although increasingly this is becoming the mainstream left position, that what we see there are the same kinds of abuse dynamics, distortions, and deceptions that we think are usually confined to the domestic sphere. Domestic abuse, child abuse, situations like that. What's underneath all of these? I call them cluster B rules, cluster B personality disorders. If you haven't heard of these, you have met these people. There are 4 cluster B disorders: narcissism, histrionic, borderline, and antisocial. And antisocial is what you know colloquially as psychopathy. Personality disorders are not the kind of mental illness that you're probably familiar with. They're not something passing. They're not like a depression or a bout of anxiety that comes in and impinges on someone's life who is otherwise a stable and fairly even-keeled person. These are deeply ingrained patterns of thinking and relating both about the self and others that ends up expressing itself in extremely destructive behaviors toward other people. So basically, I think that what we call domestic abuse has jumped the shark and become mainstream. So this week, first, before we do the housekeeping, as always, if you want to follow us, I really encourage you to check out some alternative media platforms. I know that a lot of you find the show on YouTube. Thank you very much. But remember that YouTube is very likely to pull the plug on this show. If we get popular enough that they start to take notice of what we're talking about, they are going to censor it, and it's very likely they'll ban the account. So I don't want to lose you, and I don't think you want to lose the show. Check us out on Rumble. Go to rumble.com/disaffected. That's rumble.com/DISAFFECTED. And if you like us even more than that and you want to give us some money, check us out on Patreon. Patreon.com/disaffected. Several of you this week signed up to give financial support to this fledgling show. I really appreciate it. You should all have had a personal email from me. And those of you who join and sign up, I will get back to you and give you the thank you you deserve later in the week. So thanks, folks. Very little bit of housekeeping. You might remember an episode about a month ago, maybe a little more than a month ago, called The Church of Masketarianism. And that's where we talked about the religious zeal with which so many Americans have adopted masking protocols, social distancing, and what is, in my view, a hysterical reaction to the COVID-19 virus. I'm not a denier. I don't believe that COVID is made up. I do believe there is actually a real virus that does make people sick. I also accept that it has killed people. But the survival rate is far, far higher than people are acting like it is. And this is the first time in history, what we're going through over the past year in this country, where our public policy has been to quarantine well people. That is a new thing. This is not just what we do in all pandemics. These lockdowns that have happened in several states, and in fact in Ontario, which of course obviously isn't part of the U.S., but just over the past couple days, check out what Ontario Premier Rob Ford has been doing, issuing curfew orders, giving police the right to stop motorists for no cause, to check if they're outside for a legitimate reason. If they could get away with this within the U.S., they probably would. And I live here in Vermont, and I spent most of that show talking about how the government overreach has expressed itself in Vermont. Our governor, Phil Scott, has issued a series of executive orders, and executive orders are simply statements and orders from the chief executive, whether it be the president or, in our case, the governor, that have not been vetted by the legislature. These are not actual laws. They carry the force of law, but they have to be used carefully because we live in a representative republic. We do not live in a dictatorship. We don't give the executive, be it the governor or the president, absolute power, and we do not give and cannot give in our legal system the power to the executive to override constitutional rights, which is what many states have done and certainly what Vermont has done with the orders about households not being allowed to mix with each other, orders against walking out of doors with somebody who is not in your household. I mean, there's just a list a mile long on the governor's website. So in that show, I talked about what I think of as the psychological pollution or the psychological contamination that is creeping up around us having to do with COVID. And these are things like the plexiglass shields in front of the teller at the bank. Well, they're everywhere now. I don't know what it's like where you are, but where I live in Vermont, they are everywhere. You cannot find a business. You cannot find a government building. There is no point of service entry that I have been where there is not plexiglass shields separating you from the person in front of you. I mean, even bars. I do delivery driving, delivering food to people a few nights a week to make some extra money. And it's been interesting from a delivery driver's perspective. A lot of these small restaurants, and of course, they're all doing their best to stay in business, and it's really hard to stay in business, even during good times as a restaurant. This is a very thin profit margin business like grocery stores as well. They're not making money hand over fist. They have to really pump out a lot of volume, especially small restaurants, mom and pop places and diners that can't rely on alcohol and liquor sales for their high profit margins. This pandemic has been terrible for them. So many restaurants have closed because they simply can't keep the volume up. They're not allowed to have more than 50% capacity of seating, for example. And the government has been very aggressive against these small businesses. One of them, this happened several months ago, I went in to pick up an order for delivery, and there were signs at the hostess desk that said, per state law, we are not allowed to seat you at a table unless everyone in your party is from the same household. And yeah, you bet, they actually stood there and questioned patrons and made them affirm that they were all from the same household. And then they made them write down their name for contact tracing and their address and their phone number. So to a great degree, I can't blame these businesses. The end of that story is I was actually talking to the manager that evening, and he said the Vermont State Health Department sent in undercover operatives, employees of the state, to try to get a table and say they weren't there from the same household so that they could sting the restaurant. I mean, this is the degree to which our government is willing to go. So all of this psychological pollution is everywhere, but the one that really got me the most was the signs on the highways in Vermont. We don't have a lot of highways here. We've got Highway 89. I think I said we only had one in that show. I was wrong. We have Highway 91 as well. But they put up these signs last fall, in 2020, saying COVID restrictions in place. Entering Vermont, you must quarantine. And what does that mean? Well, it means that anybody who came into the state of Vermont, even people who were returning from a trip but who live in Vermont, per the governor's executive order, were required to quarantine at home for 2 weeks. That means staying home. It means not leaving, not going to the store to get food, not going to the store to get cat food, not leaving your house. Obviously, I refuse to do so, Governor Scott. It's unenforceable. It's unconstitutional. But they went so far as to put up these professional permanent metal signs. And I said during that episode, these are never coming down. Looks like I might have been wrong. So there was a local news story a couple days ago that said Governor Scott's administration is going to begin taking these signs down because apparently they're going to be phasing out these restrictions and expect these restrictions to be lifted in July. Yes, this is good news, but you will pardon me if I remain skeptical. The last sentence of that local news story said, and I'm paraphrasing, that the administration is now trying to figure out if they're going to replace those quarantine signs with other signs, other unspecified signs. Well, of course they're talking about that, aren't they? Because they don't actually want the signs to come down. And if the signs have to come down, they still want to be able to save face and say, but we really did it for the right reasons, and we really should put something up that says, be really good about COVID. Vermont takes COVID seriously. Wash your hands, mask up. That's probably the kind of thing that they're talking about. I mean, they shouldn't even be talking about wanting to replace these with something else. But this is why I originally said these signs are never coming down, because I know what motivates these people. First of all, public health is so flippin' out of control in this country. And it's very frustrating for a person like me because it seems that very few people understand that. People seem to respond to the brand name and the label, and they take it at face value. So if somebody says, I work in public health, people just automatically assume that they must be sainted. They must just simply care about people. And therefore, because they care, anything they do is the right thing to do because they're trying to keep people safe and healthy. Well, start paying attention to what public health is doing. I mean, look at Anthony Fauci. That guy has been elevated to the status of a god. Look at the Centers for Disease Control. Did you notice the news stories over the past year that said the CDC, that it stands for Centers for Disease Control, the CDC issued a ban on renter evictions, a moratorium on that? I wasn't even aware the Centers for Disease Control had that power. I'm not quite sure that they do. I should chase that down. Why is the Centers for Disease Control allowed to issue orders banning landlords from evicting people? And no, don't go there. I don't think that evil landlords should be able to simply evict people who don't deserve to be evicted. I probably don't have to tell this to you viewers, but I swear to God, whenever I have these conversations, I have to say it to people who ought to know better. I'm not actually a fan of abusive landlord-tenant relationships. Having been on both sides of them, not a fan. But what business is this of the CDC's? And if they can do this, what else can they do? So I remain skeptical. I want to see what actually happens. But I'm pretty sure that the government is going to come up with some reason to stick something else up there. I mean, the what are they called? The electronic road signs that you often see on highways where they can program a message to be displayed in lights all over Vermont. Mask up, mask up. COVID is here. Be safe, be safe. All these sorts of messages. This public health stuff drives me crazy because I was seeing public health overreach 20, 25 years ago. And I'm going to say this, and this is going to cause some of you to write me off on this topic. You're going to say, of course, he would say that. Oh, well. I used to be a smoker, a cigarette smoker. And long ago, it was clear to those of us smokers who were paying attention that public health claimed that they were engaged in a war on smoking. They were not engaged in a war on smoking. They were engaged in a war on smokers. It was not enough for them to ban smoking in bars or restaurants. They went further. They then said, no, you can't even open a private club that people voluntarily join and voluntarily patronize and voluntarily work at, where, it's a cigar bar or it's a smoker friendly. Nope, can't do that. It's all public accommodation. Anything that we want to control, we will call public accommodation and tell you what you can do and what you can't do. And then the punitive taxation. A pack of cigarettes in Vermont with state and federal taxes is over $10 now. And they say, of course, that, well, this helps discourage people. Well, there's a legitimate question as to whether the government should be in the business of taxing the bejesus out of something that they claim not to like in order to discourage people from doing it. But it isn't really about that. It's about the tax revenue. They found 25 or 30 years ago that they could get away with this with smokers. In fact, if you go and read some of the anti-smoking literature, there's a term of art they use. They call being a smoker a, quote, spoiled identity. Yes, that is a direct quote, spoiled identity. And they're talking about it for what it is. They have been able to morally besmirch the emotional image that people have of smokers to such a degree that it's not just that people object to cigarette smoke in their space, which of course I understand that, right? I would never have dreamed of smoking in someone else's space. But anytime somebody came along, even if that space belonged to me, suddenly the law said that was your space, not my space. So they realized that they could get away with punitively taxing smokers. And they said, well, it's for their own good. And then when that didn't work, they said, oh, well, it's going to go into a master fund to pay for the healthcare costs that smokers cost us. Notice that smokers are not part of us. They're the outside evil force that's costing us, the good people and the citizens, our tax money. And then what happens to that money? Half the time they simply raided the account and used it to plug a hole in the general fund. This goes on all the time. If you're resistant to this and you don't want to hear it because, well, smokers, who like smokers? Think about that a little bit. So we're going to take a break, and when we come back, the watchwords for this show are virtue signaling, infantilization, and we're going to do a lot of what I call, look at the good you do. See you after the break. Hey, listeners, guess what? We're on Patreon now. Bringing you this show costs money. Would you chip in to help? Go to patreon.com/disaffected. That's patreon.com/DISAFFECTED. Thank you. This episode is going to be a bit of a pick-a-mix, and certainly lighter than the last two. Those of you who watched the last two episodes, it was actually a two-part episode, Over the Borderline. I know that was extremely heavy listening and heavy viewing. It was heavy for me to do as well. I think it was important, and I appreciate all of you that stuck through that really graphic look at child abuse at the hands of the borderline mother. And of course, these are topics that we're going to return to throughout this show. But in this episode, it's not going to be that heavy. So you're getting a break this week. I want to talk about virtue signaling, and I want to talk about infantilization, the childlike, babyish way that so many adults are expressing themselves in public, in political debates, and on social media for political causes, because it's really getting out of control, and it's really quite creepy. It's not at all cute. It's not funny. It's not heartwarming. It's cynical. And it makes me feel this creeping sensation that comes up over my body. And the creeping sensation is worse because so few people that I notice actually say anything about this. And it makes me worry that people think this is normal, or if they don't think it's normal, that they are anxious enough and frightened enough that they're not willing to say it isn't normal. I am. So this week, I stopped into the grocery co-op in downtown Burlington. If any of you have been members of a co-op grocery store, you know the kind of place I'm talking about. wide variety of food, and actually they do a pretty good job at this one for being a hippie co-op, and it's definitely a hippie co-op. They have a reasonably good selection of just standard non-boutique kinds of food, and they serve an important purpose because they're really the only grocery store in downtown Burlington, certainly within walking distance for people who live in downtown Burlington. So I'm going to criticize them, but they're not a wholly bad institution. But oh my God, are they insufferable. So when I was done checking out, I went into the restroom, used the restroom, and as I was washing my hands, I looked over on the wall, and they've got that hand dryer on the wall, and then to the right is a very conspicuous sharps bin. This is where you deposit needles, hypodermic needles. Yes, I know. Those of you very charitable people watching. That's for diabetics. It's really a helpful thing. No, it isn't. No, it isn't. Sure, diabetics will appreciate that. Very few diabetics actually have to go into a bathroom to inject insulin and can't wait till they get home. Some do, and I'm sure that they would appreciate that. But that is not the primary purpose of this. The primary purpose is, well, I'm not sure what the primary purpose is, but it certainly has to do with projecting on the part of this grocery store their goodness and their care for junkies. Because on the left side is a rack of gorgeous 4-color safe recovery pamphlets from a local drug addiction and family services organization that serves this part of Vermont. So I'm a little bit conflicted on this because there are good people out there who work in human services who are trying to do their best to help people who are addicted to drugs, people who are in domestic violence situations, people who are homeless. But having known many, many social workers over the years, including my mother, I probably shouldn't have admitted that because you're going to think that everything I think about social workers is because I think they're my mother, and that isn't true. But what I think is true is that a lot of very good people get into social work and human services nonprofits wanting to make a difference, and they very quickly either get burned out because the amount of suffering, the amount of children who are neglected and abused, the number of families who cannot make their bills at the end of the month, it takes a terrible emotional toll, and most social workers are incredibly overworked. Their caseloads are far beyond anything that a person could realistically attend to and give proper service to within the amount of time that they have to do it. But they either get burnt out or they become crusaders, and they become so self-righteous and so convinced that their approach to the world is the correct one that they get insufferable. And they push and expand their programs. And I've noticed that a lot of these places like to parade their virtue. They like to put out things that say, look, we're not discriminating against heroin addicts. We even, we've got a sharp spin, and we've got a little recovery thing on the other side. Half of me feels like I'm being churlish towards these people, but the other half of me says, yeah, there is some of this going on there too. I don't know if this actually does any good, but I think there's some evidence, it should at least be thought about and talked about. The harm reduction model, and harm reduction is a philosophy that says we won't be able to cure everybody of their addiction, but we may be able to help a lot of them harm themselves significantly less by things like making sure they have clean needle exchanges. So if people can't get off heroin, at least they're not giving each other HIV by reusing the needles. Another example of harm reduction that I'm for actually is vaping nicotine. I told you that I used to be a cigarette smoker. I'm still a nicotine addict, no doubt about it. I vape nicotine instead of burnt tobacco. It certainly isn't as healthy as not doing it, but you would think from the public health campaign against inhaling vaporized nicotine along with vegetable glycerin that this was even worse than actually smoking burnt tobacco. And it doesn't take a genius to figure out that that isn't the case, because when I stopped smoking cigarettes and I went over to vapes, within a month, my smoker's cough stopped My hacking in the morning stopped. My sense of smell came back. My sense of taste came back. Yes, I still do take nicotine. I'm still dependent on nicotine. But I'm harming myself much, much less than when I was a 2-pack a day Marlboro smoker. So I have some sympathy with this, but I see the other side of it, and it makes me worry. It makes me worry that these are sending social signals to people to stay dependent, and that may outweigh the benefit of the harm reduction. I'm not sure about it, but it's something I think about. So as I was thinking about being there, I thought about all the virtue signaling that has become commonplace in our public discourse, particularly on social media. So I just picked a few that tickled my fancy or irritated me or made me laugh, or all three. Let's take a look at the first one. And I'll read this, of course, as I always do for those of you who are listening. But this was a post on Facebook. One of my friends screenshotted something that somebody had said on social media because it was put in a funny way. And the guy said, listen, I know Facebook isn't a spelling bee, but at some point y'all have to care, right? It's just the kind of humor and light derision and mockery that makes the day go by, makes people laugh. And this was the first response that he got. And this is so typical. I was going to say I'm going to try not to do the accent, but I'm going to do the accent. I'm sorry. You just know exactly what I think about people because I can't stop talking in the voice that I'm absolutely sure they have in real life. This used to bother me a lot until I realized not everyone has access to the same quality of education. If I can understand the point the person is trying to get across, I don't care. It's a public forum for everyone. And then the little shrug emoji. And if you haven't seen that, it's a little cartoon of a person shrugging. It's often used passive aggressively by people who just want to say, You know, it's just irritating and annoying. And I was talking to my friend privately, of course, about this, and he was commiserating with me. He gets a lot of these responses when he puts something up there, a light joke like that. These ultra serious responses, right? And when you first start interacting on social media, before you've understood and absorbed the mores, and before you've been able to sort of sort people into types, right? And there are types of people on social media. You might think that these people are actually saying something worth listening to, but they're not. They're just bragging about their own moral virtue. This used to bother me a lot until I realized that not everyone has access to the same quality of education. You might as well have said, this used to bother me a lot until I was washed in the blood of the Lamb and redeemed. I mean, give me a break. Until I realized that not everyone has access to the same quality of education. Okay, Chad, whatever his name is, we get it. You really super duper care. This is about people who just don't have access to education. And this is an opportunity for Chad to show everyone all the good he does. He can't even let a joke go by. I'll only tell you something else. Gay men do this a lot. I mean, it's kind of weird to me. I have a lot of typical gay male affectations and typical gay male humor. We tend to go for the verbally cutting, the sardonic and the ironic, sometimes to excess. And yes, I get it that we can be irritating. Sometimes I can't stand myself. But there's a lot of sanctimony among gay men lately. And, well, I should qualify that, liberal gay men. My friend and I were talking about this. And it all falls under what I call, look at the good you do. And if you'd like a laugh, I suppose if you want to get angry and offended, you could take my advice and watch this too. I got this from a parody video that you really should watch. There's a comedian named Devin Green, Deven, Devin Green. And she got sort of social media prominent, must be about 6 years ago, I think now, when she did a parody of a a video from the 1980s that was done by former soap opera star Brenda Dixon, who used to play a character named Jill Abbott. And, oh gosh, Clay, if you're watching this, I wish you were here right now because you could tell me the name of this soap. I don't know it. I'm sorry. But Brenda Dixon was famous in the 80s for playing this famous soap opera character, Jill Abbott. And in the 80s, there was a big thing of celebrities saying, come inside my home. I'm going to let the cameras inside my private life so you can see how I live. So she did this video called Welcome to My Home. And it was sort of a cross between a tour of bland modern real estate and a jazzercise video because it was Brenda Dixon lounging by the pool in swimwear. And then it was Brenda Dixon lounging in a bathrobe with a towel over her head, stroking a dog. And then it was Brenda Dixon in a leotard, working out and doing aerobics and fitness. Yes, yes, work, work. Really self-indulgent, really funny, over-the-top sort of thing. So Devin Green did a parody of it where she replaced the audio track and she mimicked Brenda Dixon's very particular voice and diction. And there was a scene where, in character, she has Brenda saying all the good things that she does, you know, that make her, you know, better than an average celebrity. And one of them was something like, and on weekends I read porn to the blind. Look at the good I do. That's everybody now. Look at the good I do. So let's look at the good that some other people do. Shall we? I'm going to go on to the next one. This brings in infantilization, as well as look at the good I do. I have no idea who this person is, and I hope I never do. Her name apparently is Mia Sosa, so she puts on Twitter, support BIPOC writers even when they're not writing about being marginalized. And for those of you listening, the visual is what makes this one. She's constructed this so that each line here sort of falls under the other. Instead of going across the screen and then getting to the end of the line and going across, it sort of steps down vertically. And she's put all of these graphics around it. They stars, little cartoon stars, twinkling. You know, sort of like the way you'd call attention to a cartoon character by putting motion lines up and stars at the end of it. It's babyish. It's just baby drawing. This, and we'll talk about that in a second. Let's talk about her words first. Support BIPOC writers. This is Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. This is a preferred acronym for people that the left likes to think of as their poor, trod upon pet minorities that only they, lefty, liberal, white people, can help. Support BIPOC writers even when they're not writing about being marginalized. Now, ostensibly, if we take this at face value, we are to believe that Mia is upset because people only pay attention to minority or Black or Indigenous writers when they're writing about their trauma. And we should be paying attention to them even when they're not writing about that. But the thing is, people like Mia, that's all they want, right? They like their trauma porn. And if they don't see enough trauma porn being generated by their preferred pet minorities, they will encourage them to write more. These are the same people who get up online and say, you know, why is it that, you know, every time a Black person wins the Academy Award, it's only in a movie about slavery or lynching or the Jim Crow South, when in fact that isn't actually true. So they claim, of course, that they want minorities and people of a different skin color to be seen as full, normal human beings who can talk about things other than trauma, things like transcendent beauty, things like love, things like political insights, but they don't really want that. Because if they began treating Black people like the whole, full, rounded human beings they are, they wouldn't have a doll to fetishize and get attention for. And that's what this is. This is just her getting attention with little stars. The infantilization that has become so common in our discourse. It really bothers me. This is, again, female typical. It's not exclusive to women. I've seen men doing it too, but it is in fact female typical in a general way. A few episodes ago, I talked to you about what I call mommy tone, right? And that's how the female newsreaders speak on NPR. They talk to you like this, like Michelle Norris during All Things Considered. It's to have a very warm, cozy voice. It's very feminine, and you're never quite sure if she's trying to be maternal and change your nappy or if she's trying to seduce you. They talk like this. It's mommy tone. And as I mentioned before, it did not used to be this way. Go back 15 years and listen to an episode of All Things Considered when actual grown-up adult women like Linda Wertheimer were the hosts, and they spoke like grown-ups. Not anymore. Let me just go to another example. That'll help. So here we have a tweet from Joy Reid, the MSNBC anchor. She's a frightening piece of work. And again, a lot of people seem to fall for her. They think she's righteous. They think that she's calling out politics of oppression. She's incredibly narcissistic, and she stirs shit for the sake of stirring shit and getting attention. So she writes, she puts up on Twitter a picture of her sitting in her car wearing 2 facial masks. And she says this, "And we double mask in our family. The hospital style one with a cute cloth one on top. Do you hear that? A cute cloth one. Feeling cute, might double mask. Feeling cute. Ugh. We'll still be doing that for the foreseeable future. Here's my fun mask." And she uses her Twitter handle because her mask is branded with the name of her show, The Readout. Get it? Yeah. Look at her. Look at how she stares into the camera. For those of you listening, the full image that goes with this picture is her sitting in her car. There's a lot of that lately. I'm not sure where this came from, but people are taking a lot of selfies sitting behind the driver's seat of their car. And she's got her double masks on, you know, the cute one. And she's looking into the camera. That stare, that ravenous stare. You see this in narcissistic people. And I've gone back and forth on this because this is a good place to talk about this. We're going to keep Joy Reid's picture up here. But a couple episodes ago, I told you that I have a list of what I call tells or indicators. The way a person dresses themselves, the way he grooms himself, the way he speaks, the way he carries his body physically. I have a list of things that are on my list of tells for cluster Bs, narcissists, borderlines, troublesome people. The more tells that a person ticks on my mental list, the more likely I am to suspect that they are troubled. They have a fractious and quarrelsome personality. And I am not going to renege on that. I am not wrong about that. I don't think I'm doing something terrible. And I do suggest that you keep such a mental list too. But there are limits to it, and it is very important to talk about the limits. And one of the limits is these things are not actually diagnostic by themselves. They can fool you and they can mislead you. This is part of the reason why it's necessary to be circumspect about your judgments about other people, not to be too certain just because they happen to hit some of these tells. I can't tell you where that dividing line is. You will have to figure that out for yourself. I've made many mistakes with it, but I've made fewer mistakes than I have caught people and distanced myself from them before they could hurt me, who turned out to be exactly what they looked like. Don't judge a book by its cover. Judge a book by its cover. If you don't, you're dangerous. But you're in danger. Be circumspect about that, however. I made what I think is a pretty bad mistake last year when I watched the video of the encounter between George Floyd and police officer Derek Chauvin, who's on trial right now for the alleged murder of George Floyd. When I first saw that video, and most of you have seen it, I was convinced that I was looking at a literal psychopathic cop. I could just see it in his eyes. I could just see it in the sneer on his face. And I made up my mind right then and there that we had just watched a psychopath in a police uniform murder a man. And I had no business jumping to that conclusion, because watching the coverage of this trial in the liberal media versus alternative media and versus conservative media has made it clear to me, it has reminded me why we have an adversarial legal system and why people are presumed innocent unless they are proven guilty by the state. There's a lot that initial video didn't show. It didn't show any context. It didn't show another actual camera angle that might have made it appear that he was not actually kneeling on his neck. It might have been that he was on his back and he wasn't blocking his airway. It didn't give any of the context for the interaction between George Floyd and the police before or after. It certainly didn't tell me about the fact that he had 3 times the level of fentanyl in his blood that is usually considered fatal. And again, I'm not making a judgment here. I am retracting a prior judgment. It may well be that George Floyd is found, that Derek Chauvin is found guilty. That's what trials are for. But I was convinced that I was seeing what I was seeing because all of the, how to describe this? I was bringing all of my prior assumptions to this, and I was treating my prior assumptions as if they were self-evident and that they didn't need any questioning, but they did need questioning. So that's an example of why you need to be careful. But with Joy Reid, when somebody actually takes a picture of themselves, a selfie, and deliberately does that stare, and that is the image that he or she wants to project to you, yeah, I do start thinking cluster B. Because that's not just a camera still. That's not just one moment in time that somebody standing off to the side captured. This is how she chooses to present herself. And that is a ravenous, hungry stare. So let's move on to the next one. Oh, Hank Azaria. So this is Hank Azaria, famous voice actor on the very famous cartoon show The Simpsons. And here's a tweet that the U.S. paper called The Hill, as in Capitol Hill, put out. Hank Azaria says he feels he needs to apologize to, quote, every single Indian person in this country, end quote, for Apu. Who is Apu? For those of you who don't know, Apu was a character on The Simpsons who owned, I think it was Quickie Mart. Yeah, a stereotype. An Indian immigrant who owns a convenience store. Guess what? The stereotype is accurate. Lots and lots of Indian immigrant families come over and open up convenience stores. Lots and lots of Chinese families, lots of Japanese families immigrate to this country and open up restaurants. What's insulting or offensive about this? Oh, I know what it is. It's because he did the voice. He did the accent. Ooh, hello, welcome to Quickie Mart. Do you see what I just did? Did you hear that? Now I need to apologize to every single Indian immigrant in the country. This is bullshit. This is self-aggrandizing, narcissistic bullshit. This is Hank Azaria doing what every other celebrity appears to be doing these days. Falling on his own sword in public for a crime that he didn't actually commit because it's a crime of made-up petty offense. And claiming, again, he's washed in the blood, isn't he? He's washed and redeemed because he's As a white man, he's willing to examine his white privilege and apologize for this. I don't believe that very many immigrant Indian families are offended by Apu. I just don't. But every day you see more of this. Every single day. I mean, the reason why people like Gina Carano, the star of the Disney Star Wars spinoff, The Mandalorian, remember her? She got fired from the show. She was, I think, the most popular actor and character on the show, and she got fired from it because she made an irreverent joke. I think, what was it that got her fired? She said that her pronouns were beep, bop, boop, a clear allusion to the sound effects of the droids, the robots in Star Wars, like R2-D2. Beep, bop, boop. She didn't take the goddamn pronouns seriously enough, so she became toxic and had to be fired. We shouldn't have to have just one or two Gina Carano types out there doing this. I mean, she's a normal person. This kind of shit that people like Hank Azaria are pulling, this is the most common thing. I don't know why more people don't see through it. This is where it gets a little bit heavier. Then we'll come back to some funny. This image is so frightening and so creepy. So this is a picture taken in a hospital room. There is a young woman in the center of the picture lying in a hospital bed in a hospital gown. She has short, choppy green hair, because of course she does. And it's very clear what's going on. She is surrounded by 4 female friends and family members. From left to right, I'll read you what's on their shirts. They're wearing T-shirts with slogans on them. And all of these T-shirts have cartoon, again, notice this, cartoon images of hands giving the thumbs up sign, and those hands are done in the transgender flag colors. And if you haven't seen those, it's pastel pink and pastel blue. These are the people who are trying to break stereotypes, right? Woman on the left, proud mom. Next one, proud aunt. Third one, I love my transgender, and I'm not sure what it is, but it's probably something like cousin or sister. And the one on the right, proud grandma. So it's a proud mom, a proud aunt, a proud sister, and a proud grandma. These 3 women all have beaming smiles on their face as they surround this young woman who could be, from the looks of this, she's probably anywhere from 17 to 21 or 22 years old. And you know what's going to happen. You know why they took this picture. You know why she's in the hospital. She's about to get her breasts cut off. No. She's not about to have top surgery. Does that make you as crazy as it makes me? I hope it does. Top surgery? Bottom surgery? It's cute, isn't it? It's just cute and cuddly. It's not cute and cuddly. It's called radical mastectomy. It is amputation of perfectly healthy breast tissue. This is not only traumatic to the body, but it removes perfectly functional, perfectly healthy tissue for cosmetic reasons, which, by the way, permanently forecloses this young woman's future choices. Even if she decides later that this was a mistake, as so many young women are beginning to decide that gender transition was a mistake, she can't get her breasts back. If she decides to have a baby, she'll never be able to breastfeed. And worse, if she goes on a hormone regimen of testosterone, which she may already be on, she will have permanent consequences. If her voice has already lowered, that lowered voice will be permanent.
And it has a frog quality to it. It sounds like a low-pitched male voice, but it's inside a smaller female voice box, and it sounds like this.
That's how she's going to sound for the rest of her life. And she will likely be sterile. She will stop ovulating, or she won't be able to carry a child to term, so she will not be able to make that choice. She will have lowered bone density, which will predispose her to early onset osteoporosis and things like breaking a hip just from walking. This is what testosterone does to a woman. She will have vaginal atrophy, which is exactly what it sounds like. The vaginal tissue will shrink, will not self-lubricate, and she'll be in extraordinary pain. Especially, this is perverse, you guys, especially if she has an orgasm. One of the consequences of this in women is that orgasms come at the cost of intense pain. So I'm looking at this picture, which was proudly shared on social media. I don't know who this family is. I don't care. There's 1,000 of them. You can throw this one away. You'll find me 999 more. This is proudly displayed. This is Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a severe mental illness that results in the harm of somebody else. This is socially acceptable. These women posting this on Facebook, the vast majority of reactions are those care emoticons, love, hearts, happiness. This is fucking depravity. One of my friends, a woman, very smart woman, had this to say when I shared this picture. She said, I'm paraphrasing her, but she said, what I see here are 4 aging women with their blonde highlights in their makeup and their attempts to hold on to their youth, acting as evil queens and scapegoating, frankly, the unattractive girl child, making sure that she's not competition for them later. I don't know if she's right, but it certainly is worth thinking about. Because what's going on in the mind of these women who are supporting this young girl is nothing pretty. It's nothing maternal, unless you define my mother's disposition toward the world as maternal, and few people would. It's so frustrating to me. This is evil. This is evil. And it should obviously be seen as evil. I should not have to go on this show and didactically point out that what they're doing to this young woman is not merely child abuse, and it is child abuse, but it is Joseph Mengele level child abuse. It is medical experimentation and mutilation. It's gore. It's gore. These harpies are ghouls. They're ghouls. And yet, someone like me, someone like my friend who commented on this, tells the truth about what's really going on. We are the ones who get put in Facebook jail. We are the ones who are looked on as hateful. We are the ones who are called dangerous. There's another way to think about this. Richard Dawkins, the evolutionary biologist, I highly recommend this book to you. Is thinking before the show today, these people must think I think about nothing but cluster B all the time. I do actually have interests outside of the topics on this show. And many of them are actually a lot jokier and laughier than the stuff we talk about here. Richard Dawkins has written many books popularizing evolutionary biology and putting complicated concepts into language that is understandable by an average adult of normal intelligence. He's a brilliant popularizer of scientific concepts, and one of my favorite books by him is called The Extended Phenotype. Pick it up. What is a phenotype? A phenotype is a word that describes the body that genes eventually build. So, for example, if you have the genes for a human being, the adult human body, whether male or female, that is the phenotypical expression of the genes, the result of the genes. A body forms with 2 arms and 2 legs and hair on the head, etc., etc. So basically, the phenotype means the physical expression of the genes, the body that results from it. Richard Dawkins' book and his idea of the extended phenotype is kind of a beautiful way of of looking at this from another angle. He says, don't just think of genes as having an effect on the physical body that they create. Think about the phenotype extended outside of that body. So imagine that genes don't merely produce the body of a beaver, right? Look at the beaver's dam, the dam that the beaver builds in the river. Look at that as part of the phenotype. Think of it as the extended phenotype of beaver genes. It's an interesting idea, right? There's a lot of fertile ground there. So you can begin to think about how genes express themselves farther, both conceptually and physically, than simply the body that they happen to reside in. So he asks us to think about the extended phenotype. I propose that the trans child, the trans kid, is the extended phenotype of the cluster B mind. This is the result. What this young woman is going through is the result of the derangement of her mother and of the other women in here who are supporting it. I don't know who these women are. I don't actually know whether they have personality disorders. It's certainly possible that some of them think they're doing the right thing. I've had members of my family who are caught up in this too, who are absolutely not cluster Bs. They're not manipulative, hateful people, but they were manipulated by cluster Bs, including my mother, into believing that things such as trans children were not only real, but special, beautiful creatures sent down, from heaven by God to teach us a lesson, right? But this is cluster B, whether it's coming from one of the women in these picture or all four of them. The trans child is the extended phenotype of the cluster B parent's mind. This is Munchausen syndrome by proxy. And as I've said before, Munchausen syndrome and Munchausen syndrome by proxy, these are not standalone illnesses, right? These are symptoms. They are symptoms of cluster B personality pathology, most commonly associated with borderline personality disorder, but also strongly correlated with narcissistic personality disorder. It should shock you that this is legal, but it should shock you that any parent does this, whether it's legal or not. It should shock you that this is socially approved of. It should shock you that the American Medical Association has declared on record that it is for gender-affirming care. This is the smiling face of evil. This is evil walking around brazenly in broad daylight, hiding behind the mask of the smiling mother. You ever seen that before? See you on the other side of the break. Thanks so much for listening. Would you take just a minute right now and share our show on social media? On Disaffected, we take a close look every week at the abuse dynamics exploding in the dark and disordered world that we live in. Tell other people about us. Welcome back. We're going to close out with the New York Times. Oh my goodness, how the gray lady has fallen. So this sort of brings it all together, this piece that I'm going to talk about from the New York Times. Infantilization, the use of children and childlike imagery, childlike language, false childlike innocence to sell wicked, depraved, or unstable ideas. This is everywhere. Mommy tone is a part of it. Grown women writers with their little cartoon images and their little stars and their little cutesy preschool sayings. The world seems to be saturated with this right now. I don't remember a time when adults acted so much like overgrown children as they do today. Other people have noticed it. I'm sure some of you have noticed it. It's a very big problem because at least two different things are going on, I think. Number one, We have actually decided as a society, we haven't said so, but we have decided by our actions that adolescence does not end at 18, or it doesn't end after puberty. Adolescence extends to at least 30 years old now. At least 30 years old. Hold on to your sorting hats, Harry Potter fans, because I'm about to say something that's going to piss you off. If you are a fully grown adult and you have social media profiles where you put your Harry Potter Hogwarts house in there, you look silly. And I don't care if this is Harry Potter. I don't care if it's anime. I don't care if it's Scooby-Doo or whatever the hell else you want to play around with. This is baby behavior. No, I'm not saying you can't be interested in these things. I have lots of things from childhood that I still like to indulge in a pop culture way. I still love watching old episodes of I Dream of Jeannie. I loved the show so much that I actually paid $400 to have a hand-painted replica of the bottle made. Okay? I get it. I have toys of the Starship Enterprise. But they sit on shelves, and there's some frivolity. They're a callback to childhood. They're a little piece of magic, and they're fun to have, and they're fun to look at from time to time. But that's all they are. They're not part of my identity. I do not seek out fandoms to be a part of, the way some of these people do. These are often normal parts of growing up, being a child, then being an adolescent. But the fact that people have held on to these things, not just as something to have fun with once in a while with friends, but take live action role playing, for example. That can be fun for people to do as well. I'm not saying that if you do live action role playing of medieval times that makes you some sort of, ridiculous child in a grown man's body. But I am saying that yes, if you do this constantly, and the entire way that you present yourself to the world through social media, or when you're talking to people as, well, I'm a medieval this, that, or the other thing, yeah, you look like an overgrown baby. These things have a place, but that place is not your entire identity. Well, it is according to the New York Times. So you know where to start with this. Neo-pronouns. Tired of your old pronouns? Try new neo-pronouns. This that I'm going to read to you from is an article in the New York Times. A Guide to Neo-Pronouns. Strapline. Are you a person, place, or thing? We have good news. And the first image here, I have to read you the caption. This ridiculous amateurish image. The caption says, we commissioned 3 artists and neo-pronoun users to draw self-portraits. Well, that's rather generous, isn't it? Not the commissioning, but the calling them artists. Because it's shit, isn't it? It's shit art. It's baby art. It's not good. Look at it. I know you can't see it if you're listening, but the cover image here is an androgynous person who is drawn to appear to be about 15 years old. Very specifically drawn to look androgynous. Absolutely bang smack in the middle. Can't tell if it's a boy or girl. No, it doesn't hurt my feelings that you can't tell. I'm not threatened by, I was going to say misogyny, androgyny. We'll talk about misogyny again another time. Everybody who doesn't agree with women is a misogynist. With those glasses that I've taken to calling borderline glasses, those thick, chunky glasses that are horn-rimmed, a little cartoon crown, a 3-peaked crown sitting on the top of this person's hair, and little hand-drawn stars circling. See, they've got me circling their head because I don't know whether to say his or her. And there's a thought bubble coming out of Zir's head that tells you they're neo-pronouns. And they are prin, prince, prince self. because this is a prince, right? Oh, it's so cute. I'm a special little prince. Let's read a few excerpts. So the article starts this way. This is from April 8th, 2021. A personal pronoun is a form of speech that stands in for a person or a group of people. She is having opinions online. They are fighting in the comments. And of course, as in the Prince song made famous by Sinead O'Connor, nothing compares to you. Thank you for educating us about that, little overgrown millennial. Non-binary pronouns as well, often the singular they and them, have become widespread. A 2019 Pew Research study found already that 1 in 5 Americans knew someone who uses non-binary pronouns. Yeah, and 1 in 5 Americans is addicted to Valium just to get through the day with people like that hanging around them. Good God. And then there are neopronouns. A neopronoun can be a word. Okay. You know why I'm having trouble reading this? Because this writing is shit. It's terrible. It's not even copy edited. There are mistaken words that have been left in the copy. There are mistaken articles left in the copy. It's lacking punctuation that's necessary to disambiguate meaning. This is the New York Times. They don't even have copy editors anymore. And frankly, anybody who turned in copy like this should not be in the New York Times to begin with. They shouldn't even be in a weekly newspaper. This level of writing incompetence is not normal. Oh, I know it's normal today. It was not normal 40 years ago, 35 years ago when I was a school kid. You would not pass writing this way. There is no reason that children cannot learn literacy except for our failing public school system. This is not a question of me being a grumpy old man. I mean, I am working on it. I mean, I'm grumpy enough to be an old man. I'm only 46. Just imagine me, should I be so lucky to get to 80. But it is not that. It's not kids get off my lawn. It's looking in astonishment and frankly disgust at the level of babyish incompetence that we accept in alleged adults these days. And in the newspaper that still calls itself the paper of record. All right, sorry for that digression. No, I'm not sorry. I'm not sorry. We go on. A neopronoun can also be a so-called noun self pronoun in which a pre-existing word is drafted into use as a pronoun. Noun self pronouns can refer to animals, so your pronouns can be bun, bun self, and kitten, kitten self. Others refer to fantasy characters, vamp, vamp self, princess, princess self, fae, fair, fae self, or even just common slang like init, inits, init self. Oh my God. I used to think that Barney was the worst sort of children's show that made you feel like you'd overdosed on NyQuil, but this is even worse. Let's look at another image from this article. Remember the 3 artists that they commissioned? So here's this second one. How to describe this? It's a dark skin, obviously black African American. Well, I would say woman, but I don't want to get arrested. It's drawn in that Japanese anime style. It's highly stylized, right? It's not a realistic and accurate portrayal. It's got these enormously big eyes that are shaped oddly, and the most prominent parts of the eyes are the artificially drawn in optical highlights. it's that very strange sort of cartoon character look. And she has almost like a crown that circles the outside of her hair. Her pronouns are, cosm/cosmos, star/stars, air, they, ver, air. I'm sorry, I got nothing. I have no idea what that means. And neither do you, and neither do they. Nobody knows what that means because it's bullshit. It's nonsense. More from the copy. How prevalent are neopronouns? Not very, yet. Is that a warning? I think it's a warning. This article, probably, I would say, it's enough to fill 6 8.5 by 11 pages at 12-point type. That's how long this thing is. That's how long it is in the New York Times. Want some more? Sure you do. So, is this for real? Yes. And around any leading edge behavior online, trolling, hijinks, and bad faith collide indistinctly. More bad writing. First of all, there's no hyphen between leading and edge. Hyphens matter. Hyphens lives matter. They disambiguate. They tell you what the noun is and what the adjective is. These people have never even heard of a hyphen. Collide indistinctly. What you're seeing here, this is a person who does not know how to write, who neither has natural talent nor has been instructed in honing their writing craft. This is a bad writer's idea of what a talented writer sounds like. It's exactly the same thing as extremely poor people who save all of their money and buy the top-of-the-line luxury car and fit it out with gold hubcaps and neon lights around the running boards. This is a poor person's idea of what a rich, classy man would do. Subjective, opinionated, snarky, yep. But that's how I see it. For those unfamiliar with the culture surrounding neopronouns right now, it's likely impossible to distinguish between what's playful and what's deeply meaningful. And what's people being mean. What's all being mean? Many neopronoun users are dead serious and are also part of the online communities that are quick to react swiftly to offenses. Okay, listen to this. That are quick to react swiftly. Oh, my God. Can somebody please bring a brick wall into this studio? I need to hit my head. They are deeply versed in the style and mores of contemporary identity politics conversations. Yeah, they are. Thick up to here. See, is there another image here? Did we do? Oh yes. Let's go on. I picked one more for you. This one. Also, again, the infantilization. Lost my place here. Bear with me for a moment, folks. Yeah. Here we go. So this image on the screen is another cartoon drawing. It appears to, and it's stylized cartoon. It appears to be a young woman who's trying to look androgynous. In her ears, she's got, it's not an earring. It's those, I don't know what they're called, but they're those plugs that are like big hollow cylinders that stretch your earlobe out. And it's got the rainbow motif in it. Her hair is dyed turquoise and she's wearing a cap that has kitten ears on it and a kitten face stitched onto the front. And she's got her hands she's got her face resting winsomely in her hand and looking off in the other direction. It's like one of those really bad romance novel author photos. And it appears to be green-skinned UFO aliens across her tits on the front of her shirt. Well, her pronouns are Dre, Drem, Dreer, Dreers, Dre self. The article asks us, how do you know someone's pronouns? Neopronoun users may publish strict boundaries and preferences around behaviors, enthusiasms, and hatreds. Many of them have defined lists of behaviors they find unacceptable around privacy or cruelty, sometimes referred to as DNI lists, short for do not interact, which they often outline in posts on Card, a service that makes single-page websites. Strict boundaries and preferences around behaviors, enthusiasms, and hatreds. So we all just have hatreds now, and that's just a normal thing to talk about, right? And it's normal for us to go online and publish lists of our hatreds and things that you are not allowed to do. And it's now normal, at least for these people, to demand that we don't interact with them. Do not interact lists. Piss off. You know what babies like this need? They need somebody to tell them to shut the fuck up. Get a job, get a life, and stop being so solipsistic. Indulging this stuff is not helping. This stuff comes out of Tumblr originally, which is nothing but a heat sink. It used to be the place that anorexics went to, and now it's basically the place that borderlines fall into, like they've fallen into a gravity well. And young people who are vulnerable to these kinds of mood disorders, trauma disorders, are getting validated in Tumblr, and it's exploded out of there, and it's everywhere now. It's in the New York Times. I think there was just a couple other things I wanted to share before we close out here from that article. They went to several experts with unpronounceable names, because they're just social media names, for quotes to round out this story. So one of them is MX D'Angelo. Oh, MX, by the way, that's a non-binary courtesy title. So they're not Mr., they're not Miss, they're not Mrs., and they're not Ms. They are MX. And the only people who use MX are confused young women who are too young to know any better and will probably grow out of it. And I'm sorry to say, middle-aged lesbians with a chip on their shoulder. MX D'Angelo, who takes the non-binary references themselves, said the social media discourse around neopronouns died off to some extent around 2014. Did it? Before resurfacing recently. They theorized that increasing interest may be a result of the coronavirus forcing people indoors. You think? These people didn't have lives to begin with. Now they have even less of them. What else are they going to do? I got to give you more. This is MX D'Angelo. When we go about in the world, we have to perform gender in ways that are typical and normative over and over and over again. But because a lot of us have been in our houses for the last year, we haven't had to perform them, they said. So the link between the performance and the self is weakened. We can't have that, can we? Shore that link right up. No, you don't have to perform gender. You don't have to perform gender in typical ways, and you don't have to perform gender in non-typical ways. Why? Because that's all that gender is. It's a performance. It's a histrionic display. It's theatrics. It's affectation. It's a substitute for personality, is what it is. It's a substitute for personality. for a normal, well-rounded personality, the kind that has rough edges, smooth parts, good parts, bad parts, interesting parts, and boring parts. It's a substitute for personality. And this is also disturbing because a lot of the young people who are drawn to this stuff are drawn to it because they do have particular characteristics that make them more vulnerable, and one of them is autism. Okay? Some of this is very typical autistic behavior. Autism can range from the milder end all the way to full autism, where somebody may be mute, unable to speak, might simply have temper tantrums, reacting to stress, but can't actually verbalize language, and everywhere in the middle. My nephew is autistic. I've seen this up close and personal. This is actually, when you hear the term neurodivergent, that has been co-opted basically to be a label that anybody uses to excuse any bad behavior that might actually come from them just being cussed or, frankly, from being borderline personality disordered. Borderline personality disorder is not neurodivergence. You're not hardwired differently. You have a character and a personality disorder, a mood disorder, a trauma disorder. Autism, however, is actual neurodivergence. And these kids, it's not a mystery why a huge percentage of the young people, particularly girls, I think I saw a statistic recently that in the gender clinics for youth in England, the very fact that we have gender clinics for youth is appalling, that 30 to 40% of the young girls in there who are trying to become men were actually autistic. This rigid binary way of thinking, they accuse everybody else, the advocates here accuse everybody else of thinking in binaries, but it's actually they who are thinking in binaries, and it's actually autistic. That is a feature of autism. Having rigid categorical thinking. One thing has to fit into this slot. It may never fit into this other slot, and to do so upsets me greatly. That's a feature of some kinds of autism. You can see why such children would get confused. What if a little boy who thinks in this categorically rigid way sees that other boys don't like the nail polish that he has on? Other boys don't like to have fantasy fairy castles. They like rough and tumble stuff. The autistic boy is very likely to think, I'm in the wrong category. I'm actually supposed to be a girl. We shouldn't be encouraging this. And I'll read you just a couple more passages before we end here. What do neo-pronoun users say about all of this? We wanted people to tell us in their own words about why and how they used neo-pronouns. Because they are young, we agreed to let them use only their first names. This is a warning bell should be going off here, folks. The New York Times is participating in, I hesitate to go so far as to call the writing of this article itself grooming, but it's in the neighborhood. They're bigging this up. They're bigging these mental and mentation problems up among these young people, and they are stamping valid over it by putting this in the newspaper. So one young person says, being neurodivergent, I tend to perceive how a word makes me feel rather than just seeing the word. The noun self user gum 13 wrote in a message on Twitter, I chose my bink bonk pronouns because they remind me of clowns. Clowns and Harlequin dolls make me very happy. I'm sorry, that makes me really sad. I'm sorry, I didn't expect to have that reaction. That makes me really sad. Because this young person, this autistic young person, is swimming around in a world of predators. This is why this is using children. This is adults using children for sinister aims. It's using children as costumes to hide behind. It's using childlike interests to camouflage their wicked intent, their boundary violations, its exploitation. There is a reason why you know the name Greta Thunberg. Greta Thunberg is 18 now, but she was, 16 years old when they first started putting her in front of cameras? And who's they? Her parents. Her mother is an opera singer. Her father, I can't remember, but I believe he had something to do with the arts, a personality or celebrity of some sort. Her narcissistic cluster B parents. Yeah, I'm guessing, and I'm pretty confident. They have exploited their daughter. They have taken advantage of her autism and her emotional instability. And they've stoked it in her. They've sent her to bed with tales of the world ending. They've filled her to the brim with anxiety and fear about the world burning up because of climate change. All sorts of exaggerations. Ugh. Now I have to say something about that. Climate change is real as far as I can see, but I am questioning the extremity with which some people describe it. I don't know the answer to that question. I'm not sure anybody does, but I do not trust the status quo. I do not trust the received wisdom anymore because I have noticed the same behaviors in people pushing that narrative of doom that I see pushing other cluster B typical narratives of doom. So Greta Thunberg has been used by her parents, used by the United Nations, used by the media. They put her in front of a camera and watched her have an emotional meltdown where she screamed at people on the world stage at 16 years old. And everybody clapped and cried. It's disgusting. Infantilization seems to be the method that cynical adults are using these days to disguise their true intentions, to disguise the harm that they mean to cause to others, to camouflage their greed and their boundary violations behind a childlike facade. It's bad enough when adults take on childlike mannerisms and speech patterns and social media stances and affectations. It's bad enough when they do that because people don't see through it. We are, in fact, treating 30 and 35-year-olds, especially women, we are actually treating them as if they were tender 16 or 17-year-olds. I see women, New York Times reporters included, who are 30, 35 years old, vicious, lying, narcissistic, unstable women who write dramatic stories, calling people out, whipping up mobs, and as soon as anybody pushes back on them, people rush in to defend them. They describe 35-year-old women as young, vulnerable women, like she was a 16-year-old girl. So anybody who pushes back against her bullshit is a misogynist who's going after... They want you to think of her as a little girl. And they think people like me are the sexists. People like me are the misogynists. No. It's time to grow up. If you're an adult, if you're a full grown-up, be a grown-up in public. We need more of it. See you next week. Want to talk back to us? You're in luck. Call our listener line and leave us a message. 202-979-2480. That's 202-979-2480. And remember, we do reserve the right to play messages on the air. Hey listeners, guess what? We're on Patreon now. Bringing you this show costs money. Would you chip in to help? Go to patreon.com/disaffected. That's patreon.com/DISAFFECTED. Thank you.